Okay, hey, we're going to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today, we have a really special episode for you guys from the brand Zelos. A little about them: they were founded back in 2014. They're a microbrand startup with a unique, overbuilt design aesthetic, and they are pretty well beloved within the community. Now, in terms of the type of watch, I consider this an everyday adventure watch. Some key common characteristics and design when you're looking for something that you can wear every day. Of course, you're going to want that sporty, legible, and tough combination, as well as typically something with an additional amount of water resistance over your traditional field watch kind of layout. Now, this is their Swordfish Field 38 millimeter in the Mosaic mother of pearl dial. This is a downsized non-diver variant of the brand's very popular entry-level dive watch, the Swordfish. I've reviewed the 42 and the 40 millimeter models, as well as between titanium and stainless steel. So a lot of different variations, but the Swordfish line, of course, was named after one of the fastest fish to swim the ocean, a blend of angular and aerodynamic surfaces and exceptional components is the way that they really describe this model. Now, you can actually get this for $329 direct in terms of the launch special pricing. Now, if you want a non-MOP dial variation, they actually go for even less at $299, which is pretty wild. And as of right now, filming this, as far as I can tell, they're not all sold out yet because Zelos has been listening to their audience who, there's been a lot of potential customers that have been pretty upset that these sell out so fast. So they said, hey, this is one of their entry-level models, so it should be readily available. So they made a much larger batch. So I'm happy that as I'm recording this and by the time this plays, you guys can still potentially add it to your cart if it does interest you. With all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, what a looker. This dial is clearly the star of the show. Check that out. My gosh, that is just, ooh, let's just breathe that in for a second. Okay. Now, in terms of the dimensions, 38 millimeters in diameter, and it's actually about 36.3 across the bezel. So this is going to be a watch that is going to wear a little bit smaller for those of you who do have very small wrists, who may be turned off by a 38 millimeter because you're thinking you would rather have a 36. I will say, I think this is going to teeter in between there where it's going to be able to make smaller wristed folks happy, as well as still work for larger wristed folks like myself. Now, in terms of the thickness, this has a 12.2 millimeter height and has a lug-to-lug of 44.3 millimeters. So very, very manageable in terms of those dimensions. It's 316L stainless steel, mostly brushed with a couple of polished highlights that you guys can see, of course, on the bezel, as well as just a couple of points right there on the inner horns of the lugs, the tops of the crown guards, on the undercuts here, on the underside of the case. You can see that, as well as, so it's quite nice. There's even beveled chamfers along the edges of these fully articulated links. So very, very handsome and very detailed in terms of their finish, which is something we've come to expect from Zelos as a brand. Now, in terms of some other details, you do get a signed screw down crown, which is loomed. So we'll notice that later once we hit the lights. And then in terms of behind this solid case back with that swordfish motif, you're actually going to have your Seiko Instruments NH38. So this is a no date movement, meaning that when you do hack this, there's not going to be a ghost position, which is something that a lot of people really have pet peeves about. So hey, not to worry, that won't be the issue here. And I will say that this particular model with the NH38, which I've had kind of not the best history with in terms of the crown feel. This one works well. It's not mushy, not quite as crisp as if, let's say, it was an NH35, but then you're kind of, again, it's a trade-off. Ghost position versus that really nice, solid engagement in terms of the time hack on there. Now, That movement, the NH38, has a 41-hour power reserve. Beats at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour in terms of its beat rate. And then this dial, guys, let's talk about it. Bright blue mosaic pattern mother of pearl dial. It also does have a nice printed index as well as a contrasting outer chapter ring, and that printed index is of course loomed, so you can see there's a nice bit of contrast. And I know as things kind of reflect sometimes, especially for those who've tried to photograph this watch, there's definitely some instances where you're gonna feel like it can be a bit washed out, at least for those inner numerals that are on top of that mosaic pattern. The nice thing is, because you do have that outer chaptering with those triangles with the 24-hour scale, well, not necessarily 24-hour scale, but you know, it's a 24-hour conversion. And you do get that 60-minute track on the outside. Those will not wash out. So you're still going to be able to get, you know, very quick at a glance. I think it is legible. Of course, there is going to be a trade-off to having a dial that is this dynamic and playful in the light. But I think it works. I think this one is definitely, you know, was one that I feel like I can see pretty well, right? Even if I do get it pretty crazy. Of course, it's reflecting off of the studio lights, even though it does have an inner AR coating. But just to give you guys, I guess, kind of an example, you know, this thing can light up and put on quite a show on the wrist. Now, you are going to get a mixture of C3 X1 as well as BGW9 Swiss Super Luminova. Also 200 meters of water resistance, which is fantastic. It still has the same amount of water resistance as a diver, except, you know, it's in a more everyday silhouette, which I can definitely appreciate. 20 millimeter lugs, which is great, but I will say the bracelet is so nice, I don't think you're going to want to swap this thing out. But of course you can if you want to. Stainless steel bracelet, 20 millimeters, tapering down to about 17.8 millimeters. Solid links and end links, fully articulated, like I mentioned. You even do have the quick release spring bars there, as well as, you know, these flat links are fantastic. Flat brushed with our full articulation in terms of the 3-link, and you're getting all types of micro bevels. You're also getting screwed in links there, so you're gonna be able to change these with a little screwdriver, which a lot of people love. And then when you get to this clasp, it's a 21 millimeter milled push button clasp, Omega style, in terms of the amount of on the fly quick adjustment. It's non-ratcheting, so once it's out, you can't push it back in. You do have to take it off, which some people prefer. Some people prefer the ratchet to try to, you know, size it when it's on your wrist by expanding and then just kind of clamping it down. But you do have to depress the button to do that. The nice thing about this is once you have it locked, it's locked and you're not going to accidentally over tighten it. Now, one drawback is, of course, you do have that extender section, which is very visible, but I will say they do a good job of kind of blending it with the clasp itself, so it's less noticeable. But for me, my feedback is always going to be, hey, if your clasp is already going to come out this far on the folding section, why not just extend the clasp so that it covers that, so that now when this extender comes fully out, you're going to be looking more like that versus like this, right? So I think that would be preferable for me anyway. And I have that same critique, of course, even when this is done on an actual Omega that's going to cost thousands of dollars versus this costing hundreds of dollars. So Zelos, if you're listening, yeah, I think if you just extended the clasp a bit, and I know this is a really short lug to lug watch, so you probably don't want to extend that, but if you look, right, that folding section is not as long as the lug to lug, and I think you wouldn't add too much length by just adding the clasp enough to kind of meet up, at least somehow get a little bit closer to alignment with the edge of the folding section, just so you wouldn't see the extender when you do have it extended. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really, really well. Of course, if I do get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens, you're going to have a bit of perspective distortion. It's going to appear much larger than it actually is on my wrist. So I like to keep it a little bit lower. You guys can see has a nice drape on that wrist there with the short lug to lug. I would say the bezel does sit a bit proud in terms of kind of the visual lines, but I don't think it's anything that is causing a hindrance to the aesthetic. I think it still looks quite good, especially considering how angular and tapered everything is in terms of just the overall look. Very, very nice. But what I'll do is I'll lay my wrist down here. It's a 7.5-inch wrist for those of you that are wondering. And then I'll just tighten up the frame so you guys can get still a detailed look at this, but maybe just a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how it might sit while on your own wrist. Ooh, a little too close. There we go. So check that out. Nicely centered. Some might even say a bit small. I will say that the dial opening is definitely smaller. That and the dial layout itself with the chapter ring, of course, pushing those center, hour indexes closer to the center of the dial. It does definitely have a bit of a shrinking factor, which some may love and others may not. Some people like a big expansive dial for more wrist presence, and some people like something a little bit more subdued like this, so that you're kind of looking at the watch as a whole and you're not just obsessed with the dial. And with honestly how much punch this Mosaic mother of pearl dial has, you don't need a lot of surface area to enjoy it. You can absolutely just kind of see how, oh, look at that. Look at that. Wow. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to like. So with that said, let's actually get this off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, this is in fact a Zelos watch. So of course it has crazy potent loom. You can even see, even at this very harsh angle, that the crown is loomed and quite visible there. Even if, why don't I hit it with a little side light so you can see that there. Yeah, very, very legible, very bright. Again, more so than your typical field watch. This definitely gives you more of that everyday legibility, versatility, and capability. Now, one thing I always like to work into these loom shots, of course, is a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe include a little bit of harsh lighting, which might expose any types of factory defects. But all you're going to notice here is just a really nice uniform finishing. Look at the way that the light glides over the flat links. Very nice. And you can see, although not quite a a luxury level of finishing, definitely finished finer than it needs to be for being such a utilitarian sports watch. It definitely still offers you a ton of bang per buck, especially at this early bird kind of launch special pricing. Now, as you can see, if I get into an angle like this where it's all lit up on the dial, you're going to notice now that the numerals in terms of the hours are going to be a little bit harder to read. But, guys, there are watches that actually don't even have indexes on there. So I think you'll probably be fine. But again, the nice thing is you do have that outer chapter ring, which does offer you a secondary amount of points of reference there. And this dial is just magical, guys. Look at the ways that it plays. Just different patterns, different hues, different tones, and different lighting situations. That is just beautiful, guys. I cannot get enough of this dial. Okay, so closing thoughts on the wrist. Compact, yes. but hefty and solid feeling still. So it does remind me a bit of my Ginza Alpinist, definitely crossed with, let's say, my Formex Essence 39. In terms of its looks, I think it's still its own thing. I don't think it even took inspiration from those watches. It's just commonly, it's looking like it just because they share certain design aspects, which are sharing across a lot of different models. But those two kind of stand out to me in terms of, also having good water resistance and being kind of everyday types of pieces on opposite ends of the spectrum, right? One being more of a mainstream piece with Seiko, and then another being more of a micro brand piece, or an independent brand with Formex. Both are amazing options. This is much less expensive and does offer you a lot of those same great attributes. So I own both of those watches and I enjoy them very much, and this watch I still get a lot of enjoyment out of. So guys, there is a smaller layout in terms of the dial, but I think that paired with the relatively stout case height really seems to shrink the overall appearance, right? So the footprint, the silhouette, whatever you want to call it, is going to work for a lot of folks here, whether you have a very small and slender wrist or a larger wrist like myself. In terms of model variants, definitely check for current availability, but there are a lot of cool variations that are out there. It's also available in a bronze case on a rubber strap. So there's also even apart from the dial variation, you can even get a different type of, case material and strap choice right out of the factory, which I think is pretty cool. Now, in terms of comparable models, from the Seiko Alpinist to the Boulder Venture to the Monster Triumph and up to the Rolex Explorer and Omega Railmaster, the fully loaded everyday adventure sports watch is definitely rising to the popularity previously reserved for only dive watches. So there's tons of competition that's out there, absolutely. But this is one that just is so much fun, so funky, and just in kind of the tradition of what we know and love from Zelos. It just has so much character, which, it's something that I can appreciate, especially somebody with a large a larger collection of watches. Stuff like this I can really enjoy, as much as it's nice to have those super versatile, very boring and mellow pieces. Stuff like this definitely puts a smile on your face. So for me, guys, bottom line, this is still a lot of watch for the money. It wears really well, and it is really a great attainable everyday entry point into the highly coveted Zelos brand. I mean, Zelos, they make a wide array of watches, right? From stuff like this, and that's crazy. This is like a reverse halo. Like their entry level model is this good and has a Mosaic MOP dial option, right? And it is fully loaded. That's wild. And then they also have other stuff that is, exotic materials and composites, meteor, forged carbon, skeletonized. There's a lot to love about this brand. And the cool thing is something like this can get you into the brand, but at a place where it still feels absolutely like a Zelos. This isn't a watered down, cheaper Zelos. This is, I would say a distilled take on everything that you love about the brand, but just at a much more affordable and accessible price point. And now even accessible in terms of their inventory levels. So very cool. Let's not, underappreciate that. So with that said, let me know what you all think in the comments below. If you like the video, please leave a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.